Good night. H. Mahara here. When loving a borderline takes all you've got, and I don't just mean it takes all you've got to give the energy, the focus, the time, the walking on the eggshells, but loving a borderline takes all you've got. What can that mean? Well, it can take what is a more fragile sense of self away from you. You lose yourself in the relationship, in the struggle of the chaos and the drama and their approach avoidance conflict. So they're pulling you in and pushing you out and pulling you in and pushing you out. Loving a borderline. Sorry, that's my chair squeaking, not anything else. Okay? There it goes again. Yeah, never mind. Not bodily functions, right? So loving a borderline, like, you needed to know that really, huh? You'd be surprised to get the odd silly comment like chair squeaks up against something here, which is like there's a box down there. And then it'd be like, people will ask me if I did, release wind. It's like, seriously, come on. Anyways, we got to be serious here, right? Yeah, of course. That loss of self that is so painful comes from loving a borderline. And when you're loving a borderline, people often say, well, what do you mean a borderline doesn't love me back? No matter how they've treated you or how many times they've maybe ghosted you, maybe come back, maybe that cycle, or if you've been discarded, people still think, well, why? What do you mean they don't love me? What were they doing? And then I've seen comments on the channel lately, people expressing things like, well, in the BPD idealization phase and honeymoon phase, if you get one, because it seems to be not like such a pattern thing for everybody with BPD anymore. Gonna have a lot more coming on what's morphing about BPD. Why all these changes? Why are so many people with BPD behaving in more severe ways, more hurtful ways, meaner ways? That doesn't have to do with the pseudoscience explanations of, they're psychopathic or the secondary psychopathy or the comorbidity with everything on earth. But so in loving a borderline, you are giving everything and you lose yourself. And then, okay, this thing about, but they must love me. I mean, they said they loved me. This is what people have expressed recently on the channel. And sometimes I'll borrow a little bit about what a client said here or there, but like in a very nondescript, not breaking confidentiality way. It's really hard sometimes for people because, what are you doing right now if you're really hurting? You're in limbo or BPD relationship breakup, but like you want your ex back and maybe you think you're no contact, but you're in contact. And so it's like those cycles, right? Then you might be thinking, well, yeah, I still love him or her and they must love me. They said they loved me. Someone commented recently on the channel, they said, I don't mean to laugh at it, it's just not at all. But they said, but they never said they didn't love me. They just called me a lot of things, told me to F off and called me mean names. Well, see, this is where people, again, I want to say, with codependency, which you maybe aren't consciously aware of yet, is that you still think that your love is more healthy than it is. And I say that with all due respect, right? To help people, not to insult anybody. And so there's that from your side, okay? But the person with BPD doesn't know who they are. They have no sense of self. They can't receive your love. They can't take it in. And they can't trust it because they don't know who they are. They don't trust anybody or anything. And then they might say they love you. But how is it? Can you relate to this? Has this happened to you? Or is it happening now? Or on and on? How is it that you can think that whether they say I love you or not, but if they say just all these mean things to you and call you a whole bunch of things and blame you for a bunch of stuff, which we know that usually goes on at least at points, right, in these relationships, if not more and more predominantly, how can you think that that's them loving you when they're really, really hurting you? Because you know what? Like, relationships that are healthier, they take work and effort. And then that comes to the question, what is love really, right? And I can just tell you, I mean, I could say more, but it would be a little bit off topic and maybe people aren't here for what is love. Let's talk about a healthy, loving relationship that you don't have right now. Point is, love, one of the best definitions I saw was M. Scott Peck's definition Love is hard work and honesty. Because, you know, in healthy relationships, and I happen to be in one myself, so I think I know a little bit about it, you know, but like, there's so many definitions of love. But you're not going to find love with a cluster B. That's for sure. That's trauma bonding. It's not love. It might feel like love, and you're not getting love when you're loving the borderline. Well, they said they loved you, or they didn't say they didn't love you, but they called you all these names, called you bad stuff, they treat you horribly. Well, love isn't supposed to hurt like that. Like, I'm not saying there's never a little pain in love, healthier love, but not like that. Because people with codependency, again, people with BPD, let's just say, and maybe you don't know if you're a codependent or not, or maybe you hate that word. Some people do. But it's not just a word. It's a construct. It's a reality. It's important for people to understand. This loving them and getting nothing back. And in the beginning, like somebody said, I think I didn't finish that sentence, I'm sorry. Somebody said that like in the idealization phase, it's not any more real, they're loving you, than in the devaluation stage, which is very true, actually. And I can't remember what they went on to say about why they thought that, but they're absolutely right about that. Because people with BPD don't have the emotional capability, sense of self, know themselves. They had arrested emotional development, so they're not in the here and now at the age that they are chronologically. They're not totally, I don't want to say not all there, but in a way, not all emotionally there with whatever age they are. And so they're stuck back in like an arrested development stage where they lost themselves. They don't know who they are. So loving a borderline is really an exercise in being incredibly hurt, wounded, and suffering so much pain, no matter how these relationships go. Because if a person has the patterns of BPD, not diagnosed, or they have been diagnosed with BPD, but they're not seeking treatment, or they haven't sought treatment, the untreated or undiagnosed or untreated person, they would both be untreated, right? With BPD or patterns thereof, they don't love, they don't attach, and they don't even really see or hear you. And so when you're loving a person with BPD, like, you lose a lot of yourself because you are giving everything. They take everything. And then people are like, well, how come I don't know who I am anymore? Why do I feel so like I just don't know who I am? I've lost myself totally. And yet people will still persevere to try to get the ex back, to make the relationship work. Surely you don't want to lose yourself even more. So that's not that unconsciously is happening, but that's not your conscious reason. So what do you think it is that makes you want the ex back so badly that you'll do anything, no matter how much you're self-abandoning, no matter how much you're loving the borderline? It's just taking everything you've got. You're giving everything you got. You're done. You got nothing left. But now you part, not really your whole identity, but you unconsciously have left a part of yourself. You're so enmeshed with that borderline now because of the patterns of externalizing out and codependency. These, because people with BPD, they have codependency too. So dependency needs, and what does that really mean? Nobody likes the sound of that. But unmet needs from your childhood as a person with codependency, a person with BPD, and you're trying to love them, and you're giving them everything you got. You're giving them whatever you had. I'm talking about emotionally, right? In a relationship context, not maybe your whole life or your job, or, you're doing okay in those areas. But many people are struggling really, really big time with the breakup and the limbo place, and just being so like focused to obsession on an ex, for example. If you really want them back and you really think you can love them and somehow they're going to get it and it's going to change and work out, unfortunately, that's, I guess, codependent false hope, codependent denial. It's kind of like a mini fantasy. I don't really want to call it a delusion, but it's just something that you're so invested in that borderline that you're trying to love, or that you love. And by the way, in idealization, and when they say they love you, what do they mean? Well, their childlike version of what they think love is. And they're not aware of that consciously. They actually kind of, if they ever do get to anything like loving you a little bit, it's childlike love. It's like, the borderline would be sort of saying, this is never said, but the relating from a borderline is kind of like saying, I love you, like from a child place. I love you because you like my mom or my dad, or you're better. You know, like you make me feel like the way my mom or dad should have made me feel. But the borderline love is really childlike. It's really young, and it's not like the love in adult relationships. And, you know, physical intimacy in relations aside, because they do consent, you know, and all of that. But in terms of actually emotional intimacy and emotional love, they might seem at times like they love you, but it's going to be from that child place, as I said, outside of the relational. But sometimes they will be triggered to emotional dysregulation, some dissociation, and age regress during physical intimacy, which I've had many clients describe to me as they explain to me, this chair again, as they explain to me that then they're jumping, you know, out of bed or whatever to get their pants on because, you know, they're now feeling like they're with a child when the person with BPD age regresses in physical intimacy. So I've kind of jumped around a lot here, but loving the borderline takes everything from you and takes so much more too, like in marriages and divorces and financially, but emotionally, you give so much. You didn't know yourself 100% when you went into this relationship, but then you lose yourself. So when they love, if they love, you experience something that really feels like love, but it's childlike. It's from a childlike place to how they might have wanted it to be with a parent. Because people with BPD, untreated, patterns of not diagnosed, and of course not treated, they don't have that sense of self. They have more than an unstable sense of self. There is no container of self. There is no understanding of self. They don't see you. They don't hear you. You are always being related to as the object of their parent representation, as I've said, which is explained and I've talked about in many videos here, in object relations theory, which is one of the best ways, still, no matter what, the pseudoscience, the science, the studies out there that other YouTubers love to dwell on for clickbait and views because everybody loves to hear it. Well, but they're not proven. They're not in evidence. They're just flawed ideology being shoved out there. The idea that BPD is, you know, the biology of the brain, and they don't know that at all. And more to the point, so much of it isn't anyways. And even if it were, it wouldn't matter that these people with BPD, if they would get into treatment and stick with it, they can still recover. It doesn't really matter the causation. But if you're loving a borderline, you're giving it all yourself. You're giving it away. They're taking everything. And then you run out of resources and they keep hurting you, and maybe the on-off, the ghosting, the episodes, the no closure to any episode, let alone if you can get to the end of a relationship, one way or the other. Loving a borderline is just incredibly painful, and it wounds people even more, on top of maybe wounds from childhood and your codependency. But you just can't do it. And then people get so obsessed, and people say they feel addicted, and there's something to do with that, with, you know, transmitters and neurochemistry and hormones in the body, etc. But what you really need to know is that you're replaying out something of your own from your own childhood through this person, and obviously unconsciously, because people don't usually understand that, or very deeply, until they get into a healing recovery process. Like, I work with people, you know, thousands and thousands of people over 33 years. And so I'm out here to work with you, but resonate with you. But loving a borderline, you just can't do it. Like, you can really feel you love them, but you want to save them and rescue them. So then, is that a healthy part of love? And you park a lot of your emotional, relational identity on them, with them. You mesh And then when they're gone, who are you anymore? And that's why that self-abandonment is so painful when they're gone. Loving a borderline, untreated, undiagnosed, or both, right, is simply not possible because they can't take it in. They don't trust it. And everything about what happens to people with BPD that is known, unlike what all that isn't really scientifically proven or known, this arrested emotional development by or before the age of 2, and how they're stuck at a very young age. It doesn't mean they're always stuck at 2, but the developmental phase of the second year through the second year of life is so crucial, not only to whether one develops an attachment style, even if it's insecure, avoidant, etc., but people with BPD don't even get to do that because they're emotionally arrested, and then all the defenses, they're in total survival mode from that point on, even though you might not be able to see that in a 2-year-old child or a 4-year-old child or a 7-year-old child. And I've seen so much out there lately, people saying, and professional websites saying, BPD has this onset in adolescence. Well, no, it has an onset in early infancy, sometimes the womb, to early infancy, to before the age of 2, and then more of the symptomology, more of the issues, the relational difficulties that are going to happen because of that arrested emotional development start to happen in adolescence into, 18, 19, 20, very early adulthood. So loving a borderline is like just putting yourself on some altar of sacrifice, and you certainly aren't doing that consciously. And then you might really care about them. And people feel compassion and empathy, and you want to save them, and people want to get them to go to therapy. And if they just start therapy, even if they do it diligently, after, however long you've been with them and all the damage done, it doesn't save relationships. So I'm here to say that there are people out there with BPD that are really far along in recovery, and there are people that have recovered, and that's, I'm not talking about those people. But for most of you out there, if not all, and people that come to work with me, even when people, where the person with BPD has had some therapy, some of them are even therapists themselves. I've had clients tell me, so many clients, a number of clients over the years say, but my ex, my BPD girlfriend right now, whatever's going on, whatever, is a therapist. And how come? Well, you know what? If they take psychology and they get degrees in psychology, they become therapists or whatever, social work, whatever it is, that's not going to permeate or create change in them massively enough or enough to make a difference. Why? Because they're learning all this stuff intellectually, and a lot of people go into social work, psychology, mental health professions because they're trying to save themselves. They're trying to figure out what's wrong, but they can't do that because it's not an intellectual process. Lots of people with BPD are very intelligent. They can get any kind of degrees they want to get if they can function, the higher functioning people with BPD. But if they do get a psychology degree or they get a degree, like they become a mental health professional, without therapy, the intellect isn't going to permeate into the lack of self. It can't. And so there's so many people out there for so many reasons believing that this borderline is going to get better or find themselves, or then the nonsense of psychiatric speak out of the other side of the psychiatric phase, so to speak. The APA, they'll just be in remission sometime when they're 45 or 50 or 55 or 60. No. No. So none of this makes any sense. If they could age out of it, although who'd want to waste, 20, 30 years of your life? But if people with BPD could age out of it, then what would that mean? Go through this right now, and then why would they need therapy? Why would it be called a personality disorder? I don't really like that construct, but it's what we're dealing with. Why would it be called a mental illness when it's really a trauma response to one degree or another? But the bottom line is, why would we have all of this picking it apart and all those crazy studies? And they are crazy studies because they don't prove anything. They don't replicate the studies out of the APA because of the hegemony with Big Pharma. And I'm going to have more coming on that. But to do that and to really explain that, and I'm going to go deep, I'm going to have to do it in a video and or audio mixed with maybe an ebook presentation that you'll have to pay for, because I simply can't even say it on here, or I wouldn't be on here anymore. So loving a borderline is losing yourself. Loving a borderline is also your unconscious way of trying to fuse with somebody to get something that you didn't get from a parent yourself in your own childhood. And that's why codependency isn't called codependent personality disorder, because there's overlaps between codependency and BPD and dependent personality disorder. That does not mean as a codependent only that you have BPD or that you have dependent personality disorder. Some people with really severe codependency may have traits of BPD, may have dependent personality, but that's not what I'm saying to everybody. So please don't think that unless you have some reason to believe that you really have a severe situation going on with codependency. So loving a borderline is a recipe for pain and agony, and then getting into that sort of pattern of you got to have them back, because people project out onto, people with codependency project out onto unconsciously, really the wounded inner child does, this self gets parked with the borderline. And they're seeking identity through you in a wholly different, deeper, more primal way, unconsciously. And this is what is the sort of like puzzle piece fit that doesn't really fit of the trauma bond between people with codependency and people with BPD. And loving a borderline does not mean at all that untreated or even undiagnosed, both people with BPD or the patterns of, they're not loving you. They don't see you. They don't hear you. People think they're really mean. They're just so selfish, like narcissists. They're always, but yeah, they have a self-focus that's unhealthy because they don't have a self. And so they're constantly trying to survive and depend, because even your love to a borderline untreated is something that is so complicatedly painful for them inside, has nothing to do with you, that they need to defend against the very love and or rescue that you've been trying to give them for however long. So it's really time for you to look at the situation, putting yourself first instead of the borderline first, and the borderline always puts you last because you're not really even on the map. Take care.